Friends, colleagues, and all of you joining me today. What we have witnessed at the United Nations is nothing short of historic. The date will be remembered not just in the Middle East, not just in the global South, but across the entire world. After Qatar's decisive military strike, two nations, Algeria and Pakistan, stood boldly before the global stage and did something unthinkable. They confronted Israel directly, live, and without hesitation. This is not business as usual. This is a turning point that shakes the very foundations of world politics. For decades, the UN has been a stage dominated by the voices of global superpowers. Smaller nations were often silenced, pressured, or ignored. But this moment was different. Algeria, a nation with a long history of anti-colonial struggle, and Pakistan, a nuclear armed power with deep regional influence, joined hands at the United Nations to confront what many call one of the most controversial and powerful states in the Middle East, Israel. Their message was clear: the days of silence are over. They demanded accountability for the continued occupation, the relentless bombings, and the unchecked aggression. What stunned the world was not only their courage, but the timing. Coming directly after Qatar's strikes, their statements carried the weight of both military reality and moral conviction. Global powers, from Washington to Brussels, from Moscow to Beijing, were visibly stunned. This wasn't a routine diplomatic condemnation. This was open defiance of the existing order, a challenge to the narrative that only the West decides which wars matter, which lives count, and which nations have the right to defend themselves. What Algeria and Pakistan did was revolutionary in the realm of international diplomacy. They transformed the UN, so often dismissed as a powerless body, into a theater of resistance. And here's the hook: their confrontation has already begun to inspire other nations in the global South. Behind closed doors, capitals across Africa, Asia, and even Latin America are debating whether the time has come to break free from silence and openly challenge the dominance of Western-backed policies in the Middle East. Let us remember, this is not happening in a vacuum. Algeria has always carried the legacy of anti-colonial revolution, throwing off French rule after years of bloody resistance. Pakistan, born out of a struggle for independence, carries its own burden of history, yet has consistently played a central role in defending Muslim causes on the global stage. Today, these two nations are no longer content with symbolic gestures. They are shaping geopolitics in real time, and the world is watching. What happens when countries long dismissed as regional actors begin to rewrite the rules of the global order? What happens when they no longer accept the Western monopoly on legitimacy and instead speak directly to billions across the global South? At the United Nations, Algeria and Pakistan shattered diplomatic silence by openly confronting Israel after Qatar strikes, sending shockwaves across the global stage. For decades, this chamber has been dominated by the carefully crafted words of global superpowers, where smaller nations were expected to sit quietly, nod, and endorse resolutions written far away from their realities. Yet on this historic day, the script was broken. Algeria, a country that still carries the memory of its long and bloody anti-colonial struggle, and Pakistan, a nuclear armed nation with immense regional weight, rose together to deliver a message that reverberated far beyond the walls of the UN. This was not routine diplomacy. This was defiance, bold and unfiltered, and it left global powers visibly stunned. The world is accustomed to carefully staged statements where language is diluted, urgency is lost, and truth is buried under layers of diplomatic balance. But the moment these two nations spoke, it was clear this was something different. Their words were sharp, direct, and unapologetic. They challenged Israel's continued military aggression and occupation in terms the global body had not heard with such clarity in years. The timing added a forceful punch. Coming just after Qatar's strikes, Algeria and Pakistan's words were not floating abstractions, they were anchored in action in the reality of a world where silence was no longer an option. And in that instant, the chamber shifted from being a symbolic hall to a battleground of ideas, where truth cut through the noise of power politics. Observers around the globe felt the tremors. From Washington to Brussels, policymakers scrambled to calculate what this new reality meant. From Moscow to Beijing, governments watched closely, realizing that the global South was not only speaking up, but reshaping the tone of international diplomacy. What Algeria and Pakistan achieved was more than a condemnation of Israel's policies. They broke the illusion that the UN would remain forever a stage managed by the same powers, telling the same story, suppressing dissent and silencing those who dared to demand justice. In that moment, Algeria and Pakistan forced the world to confront a new voice, a collective voice of resistance that has been building quietly but could no longer be ignored. The historical weight of these two nations amplified the message. Algeria's very identity is forged in resistance, born out of the fire of liberation from French colonial rule. Every word it spoke at the UN carried that legacy, that refusal to be dominated or silenced. Pakistan, for its part, has always maintained a significant place in Muslim world politics, balancing its geopolitical role with its identity as a defender of causes beyond its own borders. The pairing of these two nations at this moment was not accidental. It was symbolic. It was strategic. And it was electrifying for those watching who have long asked whether the silence of the oppressed would ever be broken on the world stage. The hooks from this moment are powerful. What happens when nations, once dismissed as regional players, begin dictating the terms of global conversation? What happens when their words echo far louder than the carefully rehearsed speeches of superpowers? And more urgently, what happens when their courage inspires others? When capitals in Africa, Asia, and Latin America see that it is possible to break ranks, to speak openly, to confront without fear. This moment at the UN was more than an isolated act. It was a spark, and sparks ignite fires. In the eyes of ordinary people around the world, this confrontation carried a sense of justice that many feel has been absent in international politics. For too long, aggression was normalized, occupation was rationalized, and suffering was treated as collateral damage in the name of security. Algeria and Pakistan did not merely challenge Israel, they challenged the structure that allows such aggression to continue unchecked. Their stand called into question the legitimacy of a system that preaches democracy while enabling endless cycles of violence. They peeled back the carefully maintained facade and showed the world the raw contradiction between words and deeds. The silence that followed their statements was telling. It was not the silence of disinterest. It was the silence of shock, the silence of recognition that something irreversible had just taken place. Nations were forced to choose, to either acknowledge the truth spoken that day or to retreat further into the comfort of denial. And as the speeches reverberated across social media, news channels, and conversations in countless homes, it became clear that the message could not be contained within the marble walls of the UN. It had spilled out into the streets, into the hearts of millions who finally felt represented by voices that dared to say what others would not. At its core, this moment was a challenge to power itself. It was a reminder that no matter how entrenched an order may seem, history is shaped not by silence, but by the moments when silence is broken. Algeria and Pakistan proved that when nations decide enough is enough, when they speak with the conviction of history and the urgency of the present, even the most powerful are forced to listen. And that is why the world was stunned, why the global balance seemed to tremble, and why this confrontation will be remembered as more than a speech. It was the sound of history turning a page. Friends, this was more than a UN speech. It was a declaration that the age of silence is ending, that the oppressed will speak, and that the balance of power in our world is shifting before our very eyes. Algeria and Pakistan have shocked the world not by force alone, but by daring to speak truth to power in the most public forum available. We are entering a new chapter of history, one where smaller nations, long dismissed, are stepping onto the center stage. The question now is whether the global community will listen or whether it will cling to a crumbling order. But one thing is undeniable: what happened at the UN today cannot be erased, cannot be ignored, and will echo in the halls of power for years to come. Thank you.